be, even though it's deceivingly not warm outside. It's actually really cold. But it is still nice to feel the sunshine coming in. So I hope everybody's having a great Saturday. And I just want to double check. So like I have two screens now, but I'm still trying to figure out what you guys are seeing versus what I'm seeing. Are you guys able to see the PowerPoint? Yes? Okay, good. Okay, I
Yes.
just wanted to make sure that you guys, because I'm trying to look at both. I want to be able to see the chat and see people's faces and things, but also manage the PowerPoint. So I just wanted to make sure. Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and get started this morning. Welcome to our Saturday session, our March 26th Saturday session.
Shasta, we see the
Just as
PowerPoint in edit mode. If you
in edit mode.
if you want to click on slideshow at the top and then put
Okay,
it
let me see
in.
what happens. But then I lose you guys. I can't see
Oh,
you
then don't
anymore.
do that. Okay.
See that? Isn't that weird?
Hmm.
I'm going to work on it. Once I leave the screen and give control to Amanda, I'm going to see what I can figure out. So I apologize, guys, that you're seeing in edit mode. For some reason, when I put it in present, it takes you guys away on both screens. So I don't know. Just a few reminders as we get started to be mindful of your mic. Just make sure that you're muted. If you don't want us to hear the background noise or whatever's happening around you, but if you do want us to hear you, make sure you do unmute yourself. Try to have your video on. We know that here in the great state of Kentucky, we do have connectivity issues sometimes. So if you need to turn your video off when you're not speaking, that's okay. We understand. Try to use it when you can. But if you are speaking, try to turn that back on just so we can see your face. Also, just a reminder, this is a recorded session, so you can always go back to these sessions at your convenience. And if you need a break, take a break. We're all grown up, so if you need to step away, just let us know in the chat. But also we will have a break around 11. So that will be a scheduled time for you to get up and stretch and take care of yourself. But also, again, just take care of yourself if you need to. Just a reminder about navigating teams. I think we're all pretty familiar with this now, but just in case, this little people, these two little people symbol here, if you want to see who's here today, you click that. This is your chat. If you click it or unclick it will let you see the chat bar and what's happening in the chat. This is reactions. So it allows you to raise your hand if you need to raise your hand or have any other kind of reaction, a thumbs up, a heart, whatever. This is the chat rooms. You guys don't have to worry about that too much. But if you do have questions about chat room, if you lose the chat, get kicked out of the chat, you can click this and it'll take you back to the chat room. But I think Becca's got it to where everybody's going to go automatically where they need to go. This is your camera off and on button. So if you need to turn your camera off, you use this. This is your mic off and on. And then if something happens, Amanda knows this. She'll be sharing her screen today, but this is the screen share. And if you need to leave, that's how you do it. Just a reminder of our team norms. Participate respectfully. Be considerate and welcome multiple viewpoints. Devote your attention to those speaking and sharing. I know it's very hard on a Saturday when the sun is shining to be here. But as I always say, be here or be there. Right. If there's somewhere else that you have to be, you need to be, then do that. But if you're here, then be here. Ask questions for clarification. So if there is a point or a comment or something that's said, feel free to ask questions for clarification of either anyone on this team or Amanda, our presenter today. Be courageous and speak your truth. This is a safe space for us to talk, to ask questions, to raise concerns. Own your intentions and your impacts, and just honor our time together. Also, just a reminder about staying connected. There are multiple ways for this team to stay connected, even though we are in a virtual environment. There's a Kentucky Lead SharePoint site where you will find everything that you need: recorded sessions, forms, documents, your discussion board, all of those things are there. As a reminder, our directory is a great place for you to say, where was it that Ashley worked? Where was it that Krista worked? She had a really great comment, and I really like to speak to her more about that. And so you could pull up the directory to find that information. Kentucky Leads discussion board. Our discussion board, there has been some really great conversations that have been happening on there. I've been making it a point to hop on there, once a week. There has just been some good just questions and great resource sharing. I've even learned so much from you guys, some great resources, and it's just been awesome. As a reminder, though, it is part of your annual evaluation. Every cohort, every person annually has an evaluation. That is part of that. Um, Feel free to share your comments, your questions, or your ideas related to Kentucky Leads, or if you have a really good cookie recipe, like nobody's going to be mad that you shared that either. Reflect and respond between each session. So, again, just be mindful that at least once you hop on there, see what's going on, see what input or feedback you can provide to your team, or just to pose a question. And for our agenda today, it looks, similar to usual. We have this time together just to kind of check in, get ourselves situated. We have Kentucky Leads updates coming up here in just a second. We will be hearing from Amanda today about an instructional support of using implementation science to improve student outcomes. Again, we'll have a quick break around 11. 11:05, we'll pick back up with this great topic of using implementation science. 11:45, we'll have group sharing questions and reflections. And we will also have our evaluation and wrap up time. We have that time built in for you guys around 11:50. Before we move on to updates, are there any questions or anything you want to pose to the team before we get started? Okay, I'll let you guys hop onto our leads updates.
Pete, did you want me to jump in first?
Please.
Okay. All right. So good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing having a great morning thus far. We're very, very excited to announce that we will be having a Kentucky Leads Summit. So we're very excited about this opportunity. We're looking at June 4th. So you all would come in on June 3rd. And the actual summit would be on June 4th. We will be providing hotel accommodations and travel reimbursements. And so the purpose of this summit is that we really had an opportunity to dig into the data and to look at the survey. And a lot of you all expressed that you wanted more time in the subject and some of the topics that we've discussed throughout the time we've had together. So we're taking those topics and we're putting them into a summit where we have an extended day. We're very excited. We're actually starting to plan out the day. More information will be is forthcoming for the registration. We have a presser, flyer. That information will be forthcoming. We are partnering with TACE, which is a technical assistance in Utah that we're very excited about. That will help us plan this event. So be on the lookout for additional information within the next couple of weeks. Just an FYI, we will not have a month the June 24th seminar. So we usually have our seminars the last Saturday of the month. So we will move that seminar to June 4th, which will be the Kentucky Lead Summit. So again, we're extremely, extremely excited about this summit. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to have an opportunity to do a meet and greet where we have a chance to learn more about each other because, again, we've been in this space virtually. So to allow us an opportunity to come together in community, to fellowship and to talk and to just to get to know each other deeper. So, again, that's June 3rd that we would actually, and so I'm sorry, it's also in Louisville. The summit will be in Louisville, Kentucky. So June 3rd, we would check in and June 4th would be check out. The summit will be on June 4th. And again, we'll have additional information coming within the next couple of weeks. Very excited about it. And we hope to see you all there.
And I would just like to say I'm working very hard to make sure that we have a hotel with a pool because if you're going to have to come to a session in the summer, you should have a pool. So we're working really hard to find one with a pool.
Yeah, a pool. Absolutely. Absolutely. A pool is definitely important, but we're very excited about it. And we want to make sure that this is a top-notch summit because that's what you all deserve. So we're working very, very hard with Taste to make sure that we give you that because that's exactly what you deserve. So I will turn it over to Pete and be on the lookout, you all, for information around the Kentucky Leads Summit. Our motto is Kentucky Leads the Way. So we're very excited. So I'll be on the lookout for the information. Pete, I'll turn it over to you.
You all made it a tough act to follow, and I did it to myself by going second. So I don't have a pool nor a party to offer, but I did want to talk a few minutes about the mentorship. The mentorship, as we informed y'all earlier, our university partners, Murray Moorhead and WKU, will be taking the lead on this, and we are still hammering out the details. with those folks and trying to uh, deal with every nuance that the process offers us. So our plan is to kind of to roll out the additional details next month at our meeting on the 30th. So again, very exciting. No swimming pool, and that's on the mentor and the mentoree. If you if poolside mentoring is in the mix, so looking forward to it. Very excited about it, and with that, I'll pass on to Shasta.
Thank you, Pete. All righty. So we're going to kind of go ahead and hop into our presentation. You guys are so lucky today. We have Amanda Waldrop with us, who is just probably one of the smartest women that I know, which is amazing. And she is the assistant director here with us at the Division of IDA Implementation and Preschool at KDE, the OSEAL, the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. This is something she's sharing a topic with you guys, something she's very knowledgeable about. And she enjoys talking about, is very passionate about it. So you guys are really going to love hearing from her. Amanda, go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can take over.
All right. Well, thanks, Shasta. I appreciate the compliments. I don't know that those are necessarily all true, but I appreciate the build up this morning. As Shasta said, my name is Amanda Waldrop. So good morning. Thank you all for being here today. Prior to becoming the assistant director of the Division of IDEA Implementation and Preschool, I was actually a state transformation specialist. So I co-led the state systemic improvement plan, which is focused on using implementation science to ultimately help to improve educational outcomes for students with disabilities. And so I'll just say I am a bit of an implementation science nerd. I absolutely love it, as Shasta said. So she's going to help nudge me along if I get too caught up on a particular slide, just because I enjoy talking about it and sharing it. And if you all have questions, throughout, feel free to put those in the chat, and there'll be some natural stopping points throughout. Like we'll do a couple of little polls, we'll do a word cloud. So you're more than welcome to ask questions throughout, but during those times is when I will address those questions. So thank you all again. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so that we can go ahead and get started. All right, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So just to give you an overview of the agenda for today, at least for my portion of the session, we're going to, just do a quick overview of the State Systemic Improvement Plan, just to give you a little bit of background in terms of where did implementation science originate in terms of within the Division of IDEA Implementation in Preschool and the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. We'll also take an opportunity to just talk about what in the world is implementation science. When you hear that phrase, what does that mean? And then we're specifically going to hone in on the implementation drivers. There are actually 5 frameworks, which you will hear me talk about just briefly, but we're really going to hone in on the implementation drivers, because really the way I kind of think about it is that's sort of the biggest bang for your buck in terms of out of the 5 frameworks, that's the one that, to me, in my opinion, is probably one of the most critical ones. So we're going to really take some time to hone in on the implementation drivers today. And then with that, once we have an opportunity to go through each of the implementation drivers, you all go into breakout rooms, and you'll have an implementation drivers activity where you all will be able to work together, have some conversations about some of the things that I talked about today, and just be able to reflect on the implementation drivers and start to apply those in groups. And then once we go through the activity, you all will have an opportunity to come back, and we'll have some group discussion around some of the things that you found as you went through the activity. All right, so let's go ahead and just get started just briefly with an overview of the State Systemic Improvement Plan. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA, requires that states submit a state performance plan and annual performance report. And really that's just to help check our progress in terms of implementing the IDEA. And so there are actually 17 indicators to the state performance plan and annual performance report. And the State Systemic Improvement Plan is actually indicator 17 of the SPPAPR is what we call it for short. And so with the SIP, or the State Systemic Improvement Plan, it's actually a little bit different from the other indicators, in that states actually get to select what their SIP is going to be focused on. And so states end up selecting their SIP and what it's focused on based on conducting a data and infrastructure analysis. And so for Kentucky, we conducted a data and infrastructure analysis. And with that, we determined that the area of focus based on our needs was focusing on middle school math, specifically at the 8th grade level. And so we're working to increase proficiency for students with disabilities at the 8th grade level by also emphasizing reducing novice performance. And the reason for that is because we know that we have to reduce novice before we can achieve proficiency. And then we're also focusing within the elementary and the middle school, because we do know that math is cumulative and it builds upon itself. So it takes a little bit of time to get up to that proficiency level. And so we're working in both elementary and middle school. And so the way that we're doing this, the way that we're supporting mathematics, is we're focused on implementing, scaling, and sustaining positive behavioral interventions and supports, as well as evidence-based practices in math. And so a couple of, you may be thinking, well, why focus on PBIS if we're focusing on math? And well, the reason for that is just thinking through, looking at our data, we were noticing that students with disabilities were being removed from the classroom at a pretty high rate. And so as a result of that, we're working with districts to help provide support on PBIS, because that allows students to be able to receive that effective quality math instruction. And so that's why we're focused on both PBIS and math, but ultimately our outcome is to improve proficiency at that 8th grade level for students with disabilities, and to increase that proficiency. So with that, let's talk about implementation. So in the previous slide, when we showed the focus for the SIP is focused on implementing, scaling, and sustaining evidence-based practices. And so we're really focused on using implementation science to help do that. And the reason for that, this slide really helps to show the rationale for implementation. And really what we know about implementation is that there's often a gap with implementation. And so what that means is there's this great evidence-based practices and programs, or what we call the research. So things that we found that work really, really well in the classroom to improve results. But there's often a gap in actually putting it into practice so that students receive those high quality instructional practices. And so that gap is oftentimes implementation, thinking about the how do we take that research and put it into practice. And so children and families cannot benefit from interventions they do not experience. And so another rationale for implementation science, I always love this slide because it definitely resonates with me. I'm sure this resonates with you all as well, is our education system is pretty complex. We got lots of different things going on, lots of moving parts. But what implementation science really helps to do is pull those moving parts together so that they're aligned with one another, so we can help to achieve a common goal. And so that's, again, why we're focusing on implementation science, to help improve educational outcomes for students with disabilities. And so you've heard me use the phrase implementation science several times already this morning. So you're probably thinking, well, what is implementation science? What does that actually mean? And so this is how the National Implementation Research Network defines implementation science. And so the way that I really think about this is implementation science is really the how. It's focused on how do we put the necessary structures and supports in place to implement evidence-based practices or programs so that children receive the benefits from those evidence-based practices and programs. So that's really the key word for implementation science, is really the how. It focuses on the how, or what is required. And so there's actually what's called implementation research, a synthesis of the literature. And this was done by the National Implementation Research Network. And what they did was they conducted a synthesis of the literature around implementation practices. They looked at all these different studies, all these different research articles around implementation. because they really want to define what are the necessary ingredients to effectively implementing evidence-based practices or programs. And so through that research, what they found was actually 5 common frameworks across the board in terms of what are the necessary ingredients to implement something. And so I'm going to share with you just briefly the 5 frameworks that they found within their research, but we're specifically going to hone in on one of those today, just because I don't want to overwhelm you too much, and we have a short period of time today together. So I'll share with you just at least an overview so you can at least get a feel for what all of the frameworks are, but we'll hone in on one specifically. So the easiest way to explain the 5 active implementation frameworks is through the formula for success. And I'm a former math teacher, so I absolutely love this slide. So this is one that I've always enjoyed presenting, just because it definitely goes back to my background. Um, so with implementation science, the formula for success is, one, you have to have a usable innovation. And so, what is a usable innovation? A usable innovation is really what? What are you planning to implement? And so, thinking through this, in order for it to be usable, it has to have a few criteria. One, it has to be teachable, learnable, doable. So, really meaning it has to be feasible to be able to actually use it in the classroom, like something that's actually going to be easy for people to learn, easy for people to try it out. And it also has to be measurable as well. And so, what the measurable piece means is, can we see it in the classroom? Is it something that we can easily see if I were to go in and observe? And so that's really what a usable innovation is. It's the evidence-based program or practice that you're working to implement in the classroom that meets those specific criteria. And there's actually some resources on the State Systemic Improvement Plan webpage that's on the KDE website, which I'll share that link with you at the end. But there is a section on that webpage that actually has usable innovations on it. And there's a tool called the Hexagon tool that you can use. And what's really cool about that tool is it helps schools and districts to be critical consumers in terms of thinking through, what are some things to look for before adopting an evidence-based program or a practice. And it takes a look at, the fit. Does it fit with what and our priorities are within our school or district? What's the evidence on that evidence-based program or practice to show that it's effective? So there's 6 different categories, so that's why it's called the Hexagon tool. But it's a really great tool. I've heard a lot of districts that have enjoyed using that tool. So we'll share that resource with you at the end if you're interested in taking a look at that. So once you have your evidence-based program or practice that you're wanting to implement, the next piece of that is focusing on the effective implementation of that. And that's where really, when you saw the slide earlier that had the gap between research and practice, that's really this piece right here. And so the effective implementation piece of it is just thinking through, how are we going to implement that usable innovation or evidence-based practice or program? And so what does that really mean? One, that really means, have we selected staff to take part in using that evidence-based practice or program? Have we trained staff? Have we provided follow-up coaching and support? Do we have a structure in place to help remove barriers as staff begin to use the evidence-based practices or program? Do we have a data system to help measure whether the evidence-based practices or programs are changing the results or helping us to accomplish the goals that we're looking to accomplish? And do we have leadership on board to help support with that? So that's really kind of the drivers, and that's what we're going to hone in mostly today, and that's what we're going to focus on. And then there's also the stages, which the stages really just help kind of give I don't want to use really the word checklist, but it's the best word that's come into my mind right now. But it's almost like a checklist of steps to help get you through putting those drivers in place, and it kind of helps give you a sequence for doing that. So that's really the how. And so that's why we're focusing on the drivers today, is because the how is typically the gap between research and practice. And then also we have to have an enabling context. And so what an enabling context really means is that we have teams that are looking at data and they're engaging in improvement cycles to help remove barriers to support teachers to use the evidence-based programs or practices as intended. And so they're helping to create a hospitable environment to be able to use it. So that's the best way to think about enabling context is helping to create that hospitable environment. And so if we have all of these components in place for the formula for success, research tells us that we should achieve educationally significant outcomes. And so what you may be wondering, why is this a multiplication problem? And so thinking back, if we multiply anything times 0, what do we get? 0. So what this really shows is just the significance of having all of those components in place to help achieve educationally significant outcomes. And so that's just a very quick overview of the active implementation frameworks. Now we're really going to hone in on the drivers. And so again, you heard me talk about earlier that this is the one that me personally, I feel is kind of the biggest bang for your buck in terms of if you're going to focus on any of the frameworks, the drivers is one that is really critical. It can help to support improved outcomes for students. And so here is just how the drivers are defined. So it's just, a quick overview. Really, they're the supports that are needed to effectively implement an evidence-based practice or program. I'm going to show you the full drivers. There's actually a little bit more to this on the next slide. I'm going to try to show you just a piece by piece because I'll be honest with you, the implementation drivers, when I first started working and using implementation science, they were a little confusing. I'll be just totally honest with you. So I'm going to try to share with you a piece at a time to help try to explain it as best I can. I will also show you some examples or talk with you about some examples that may help. But if you have questions throughout, feel free to ask if you're not sure about something, because the first time you see it, it can be a little overwhelming, but I'll try to do my best to explain that to you so that you understand what each of them mean. So the first component of the implementation drivers is the competency drivers. And the competency drivers are really focused on that knowledge and skill development. So you can see selection, training, coaching. And we'll go more in depth with these in just a moment. But I just want to give you kind of an overview of the whole implementation drivers framework in terms of what it looks like. So that's really the competency drivers, just focusing on knowledge and skill development of the evidence-based practice or program that you're wanting to implement. The organization drivers are really focused in on identifying barriers using data. So as we start to use the evidence-based practice or program, we have a data system. That's where that decision support data systems comes into play. We have a data system where we're able to look at data, and then based on that data, are we finding any barriers as we're starting to implement the evidence-based practice or program? And so that's where the facilitative and administration and systems intervention comes into play, which I'll talk about a little bit more shortly. We also have the leadership drivers. And so that's really the foundation of the triangle. And so the leadership driver is really, they're helping to create that enabling context that you saw in the formula for success. Leaders are critical to the work because they're the ones that are going to be able to help remove those barriers that you may identify using that organization driver. And so there are typically two types of challenges that may be encountered, which is technical and adaptive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and hone in on that one specifically because leadership is so critical to the drivers. But that the leaders really help to create that hospitable environment to use the evidence-based practice or program as intended. And so really the drivers, they're integrated and compensatory, meaning they all work together, they're all necessary. And what they do is they ultimately push on fidelity. And fidelity, what that really means is if we have all those drivers in place, that's going to help to push on consistent use of the innovation or evidence-based practice or program. So they're going to help push on using what it is that you're implementing as intended. And so it looks like what it was intended to look like in the classroom. And then what that's ultimately going to do is help to push on reliable benefits. So it's going to help us to get more reliable data and hopefully reliable outcomes in terms of what our goal is. And so really the drivers ultimately help to answer the question, are we doing what we said we would do? And so that's just the drivers as a whole. So now we're specifically going to hone in on each piece of the triangle and go through those a little bit more. And I'll share with you some examples to help you get a feel for what each of those pieces look like. So within the competency drivers, first we have to think about selection. What's really cool about selection is it's one that I honestly didn't think much about when I first started working in implementation science, but it's something that we typically do on a pretty regular basis. The selection driver, it can be applied to a lot of different contexts. One, it could be applied to hiring a new staff person for a position. Two, it could be selecting people to participate on a team in terms of, that may have set deliverables that they're working to accomplish. It could also be applied to just things within your own personal life. Like, for example, if you're wanting to select a babysitter to watch your children, you could also apply the selection driver as well. And so the selection driver, what it really means is writing down, or at least having it down on paper, what are those specific things that you're looking for to select some. Can you all still hear me okay? Did it switch back over?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Amanda.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, my headphones died, so I just want to take those off. So with the selection driver, the key with this one is, writing down those specific traits and thinking about, thinking very intentionally about what is the criteria that you're looking for in a candidate to hire somebody, to, have somebody on a team, or, thinking about hiring a babysitter. So really the key with that is looking for tough to teach traits. And so really what tough to teach traits mean is they may not necessarily be able to be trained. It's just something like, for example, creativity may be a tough to teach trait. And so thinking through, if I am going to develop a team where where the team is going to develop instructional resources, on that team, one of my selection criteria may be that I want somebody that's creative to be able to help support with that, because we want to come up with some really cool activities that we use within that team. And so that is an example of a tough to teach trait that may be part of your selection criteria. So it's really just identifying what are those particular traits that you're looking for in terms of helping to accomplish the goal that you need, whether that be for a position, whether that be for selecting team members or hiring a babysitter. And then the next piece of that is also thinking through, screening for prerequisites. So prerequisites is really, I'm sure many of you all are probably pretty familiar with this, but if just thinking through what is the specific experience or expertise that is needed to accomplish the goal, whether that's, for hiring a position, if you're hiring for a middle school math teacher, you may want to look for somebody that has, middle school math certification, that, has a background in math, so on. So that's the screening for prerequisites. So just thinking through, what is the specific expertise or experience that is needed for hiring for the position or selecting for the team or so on. And so really another piece of that is thinking through, setting expectations for new hires. So thinking through, what is it that, if somebody's working to be, or if you're hiring for a middle school math teacher, what are those specific things that they're going to have to do, having that laid out. So when they start, that's going to help to set them up for success.
Also thinking about if you have a team, if you're coming together and you have a team that's focused on, instructional supports, having a clear expectation or set of deliverables in terms of what that team is going to accomplish is really important, because it's going to help to support them with knowing what it is that they need to contribute to the team to help accomplish those deliverables. And so those are a couple of things that are really important with selection. And so really the reason for focusing on selection is it's going to help improve your likelihood of retention after investment. It's going to help to ensure that you've selected the right person to accomplish the particular deliverable or thing that you're working to accomplish. And it's going to also help to improve the likelihood that the training, coaching, and supervision is going to result in implementation. So thinking through that, that's more from the evidence-based practice or program perspective, thinking about which teachers would you select to participate in using a new evidence-based practice or program as well. So that's what that one is related to. So those are just a couple of things with selection drivers and again, it's a very applicable driver. It's just really the biggest piece with that is just being very intentional and just thinking through your selection criteria in the beginning, writing it down before you start to go into the actual selection process. Also, as part of the competency drivers is the training and coaching drivers. And I put these two together because really they are working to accomplish pretty similar goals. So with training and coaching, they're really helping to develop that knowledge acquisition and skill development. And what's really interesting about training and coaching is really, I would say, or what's really critical about that is helping to establish a buy-in process for training and coaching. So for example, if there is this really cool evidence-based practice or program that you're wanting to implement within your school, a buy-in process may be, letting people know what the data is around that evidence-based practice or program and seeing, what the success has been around, different schools or districts that have used it, and allowing staff the opportunity to ask questions about that. And so just helping to provide them with the rationale for why, are we engaging in that particular training? Why are we receiving coaching supports? And this is really just much like, thinking with your students in the classroom. Typically with students, we talk to them about, what it is that they're going to learn, why it's important, and how it can be used. And the same concept applies here in terms of training and coaching. Just talking to staff about, those same exact concepts is really going to help to establish a buy-in process for the training and coaching and allow them to understand what the purpose of that is. So that's just a very quick overview of the competency drivers. And so now what I'd like to do is give you all an opportunity to think about which of the competency drivers do you think leads to the biggest impact on use and practice. So thinking through an evidence-based practice or program, if we're going to implement a new evidence-based practice or program in the classroom to help improve educational outcomes for students, which of the drivers, selection, training, or coaching, do you think may lead to the biggest impact on use of that evidence-based practice or program actually in the classroom? And so if you all could, you can use this QR code here, or you can type this in here on your phone, or if you want to do it on your computer, whatever works best for you. If you could answer the poll, that would be great. And so I'll give you about 15 seconds or so just to submit, because I see already a few coming through here. And then we'll take a look at the results and see what everybody thought about that one. All right, so it looks like we have most people, it looks like, have responded. So I'm going to go ahead and lock the poll. Oh, sorry if I cut somebody off there on that. All right, so let's take a look at the responses here. Interesting. Okay, so we have a lot of people said the coaching driver. We had some that said the training driver and some that said selection driver. Interesting. So this one is always kind of an interesting thing to me. I think you could really make a case for the selection driver. But the research I'm going to share with you is going to be specific to the coaching driver, well, actually training and coaching, but it's going to show you the effect of coaching in terms of impact on use and practice. So thank you all for participating on that. But I could easily see making a case for that selection driver, because if you select the right people, that may help to ultimately support use of that in practice as well. So I appreciate you all participating in that poll. So what I'm going to do is just share with you the data around coaching and show the importance of coaching. And then once I finish up with this slide, I'm going to take just a quick break to hear any type of questions that you all may have. So this is a really interesting study. This was done by Joyce and Showers. And so what they did is they wanted to really look at, how does training and coaching impact use of an evidence-based practice or program in the classroom? And so what they found is that if you have a training and it's focused primarily on just theory and discussion, that's the way the training is, there's nothing else to it. Typically, you're going to get about a 10% increase in knowledge, 5% skill demonstration to where they can actually begin to do it, but then 0% use of that evidence-based practice or program in the classroom. If you take training and you add demonstration in the training along with theory and discussion, you start to see those numbers go up just a little bit in terms of knowledge, skill demonstration, but still about 0% use in the classroom. If you add in the practice and feedback along with all of these pieces, you start to see, again, some increases in knowledge, skill demonstration, and you actually get to see a little bit of use in the classroom. About 5% of participants would start to use it in the classroom if the training contains all of those pieces. But what really makes the biggest difference in terms of using evidence-based practice or program in the classroom is coaching, is what they found in their study. If you add if you take good quality training that contains all of these pieces, plus you add coaching on top of that, you start to see a 95% increase in knowledge, 95% increase in skill demonstration, and 95% use in the classroom. And so that's really, this study really just helps to highlight the importance of coaching to support the use of evidence-based practices and programs within the classroom. So with that, I'm going to pause before we hop into the organization drivers just to see if there are any questions up to this point. Okay. All right, Shasta, is there anything in the chat before I move on?
I don't see anything, just some good info. A couple of people have said this has been helpful. Good information so far.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. All right. So now we're moving into the organization drivers. Now this one's a little bit more complex in terms of it may not be quite as familiar to you. At least it wasn't for me when I first started working with implementation science. The competency driver I was somewhat familiar with as an educator, because most of us, participate in professional learning, have received coaching supports. But the organization driver was a little bit new to me when I first started into this work. And so really the organization drivers is really focused on creating that hospitable environment to use the evidence-based practices as intended. So it's really about using data to identify barriers that may occur as you're starting to use that evidence-based practice or program in the classroom. And so I'll talk a little bit more about specifically what do these mean. And so some of this may be some new vocabulary, in terms of systems intervention and facilitative administration. So feel free, if you're not sure what some of those mean, I'll be happy to answer any questions or explain anything on those particular ones. So the first one is systems intervention. So really the way to think about systems intervention is let's say we start to implement this really cool evidence-based practice or program within our school, but we run into an issue with that, using that evidence-based practice or program, and we're not able to solve it at our school level. Like it's something that, we really need to lift this up to the district. This is something that we're not able to address at our school level. The act of lifting it up to that next level is systems intervention. It is lifting up any type of barriers that you may encounter to the level that can solve them is really the key with systems intervention. So systems intervention can apply from lifting a barrier up from a school up to the district. If it's something the school can't solve, they'll lift it up to the district to see if the district can solve it. If the district can't solve it, they may lift up the barrier to the regional level to see if the region can help support with that. And if the region's not able to solve it, maybe it needs to go to the state level to help solve that. And so that's what systems intervention is really about, is lifting up any type of barrier that you may encounter to the level that can solve that particular barrier. And really what that does, by having systems intervention in place and having, communication processes in place to do that, really helps to create that hospitable environment to be able to use the evidence-based practice or program as intended within the classroom. So thinking about systems intervention, that's that lifting the barrier up to the level that can solve it. The next one is facilitative administration. So facilitative administration is pretty similar to systems intervention in that it's about removing barriers. The biggest difference between the two is facilitative administration is solving it at your own level. So for example, if we are implementing this new great evidence-based practice or program, and teachers are providing feedback that they really need to have some common planning time together to do it. It's really difficult to be able to use the evidence-based practice or program, without having common planning periods to work together and have conversations about the program or about the evidence-based practices. That may be a barrier that you're running into with that. But because it's, more of a scheduling thing and being able to, ensure that teachers have that common planning time, that would be considered a barrier at the facilitative administration level. It is a barrier that can be solved within the school. It doesn't necessarily have to be lifted up to the district to help solve it, to the region, or to the state. So that's really the biggest difference between the two. Systems intervention, lifting up the barrier. Facilitative administration is really about being able to solve it at your own level. And so really, again, both of these are about helping to create that hospitable environment to be able to use the evidence-based practice or program as intended. Then we have decision support data systems. This is one of my favorite ones because I love math. I'm a bit of a data geek, so this is one of my favorites. But really, the decision support data systems piece is having data available to be able to monitor how is using that evidence-based practice or program going. So for example, if we've started using this, great quality evidence-based practice or program within our school, we want to monitor how that's going. So we may have classroom walkthrough data. That may be some data that we're looking at as a team. We also may have student benchmark data. We also may look at office discipline referrals. So you may also look at some additional student level data. So really, that's kind of the decision support data system, is just having sets of data that you're looking at to show whether the evidence-based practice or program is making a difference in terms of what the outcome is that you're working to accomplish. Another way of thinking about this is through the ARC lens. ARCs, I'm sure, use data all the time to think through, use that progress monitoring data to see if the specially designed instruction is making an impact on the goals within the IEP. So, decision support data systems can really be applied across multiple settings. So it's really just using data to make informed decisions before moving forward. And one thing I do want to say is a lot of people have, questions about, well, how is decision support data systems connected to facilitative administration and systems intervention? The way that they are connected together is the data. When you're looking at that data, you'll start to have conversations about it. And when you start to have those conversations, you might start to identify barriers that may be occurring as a result of using the evidence-based practice or program. And so that's where facilitative administration and systems intervention come into play, is having those communication processes in place so that you're able to solve those barriers at your level or be able to lift them up to the level that can solve them. So that's how all three of the organization drivers are interconnected with one another. All right. So now we're going to get into the leadership driver. So this one is one that is, to me, very critical to the whole process in terms of you have to have leadership to really help support all of the other drivers that are in place within the triangle. So to get us started with that, we're going to do a word cloud. I wanted to try to do something kind of fun this morning. So you're going to use the QR code there. And if you've already still got it pulled up on your phone, it should, I think, have already generated to this word cloud already. But what I would like you to do is think about what word comes to mind when you hear the phrase technical challenge. What word comes to mind? And so if you could type that in to the polling feature, there should be like a text box there. And so what it's going to do is it's going to start to populate based on what folks are typing in there. And then obviously, as more words, if a particular word gets used more than once, it's going to start to get bigger and bigger. We'll see how pretty of a word cloud we can make this morning. Interesting. And if you want to type in more than one word too, like if you want to submit again, I'm totally good with that as well. You're more than welcome to submit a couple of different words. All right. So we've got a nice little pretty word cloud here. I'll have to take a screenshot of that. All right. So looking at our little word cloud here that we got. So it looks like implementation was used quite often. We also have technology, barriers, training, COVID, certainly. Yeah, we've also got some other ones here: fidelity, obstacles, coaching, knowledge, resources, logistics. Awesome. So I really just wanted to get a feel for, if you all were familiar with the terminology technical challenge. And so now we're going to go more in depth with what does that mean. So the leadership driver, when you saw the drivers at the beginning of this section, you notice at the bottom there's technical and adaptive. And so with leadership, as part of being a leader, it is critical to understand the difference between the two, technical and adaptive. And the reason for that is your approach to how to solve those challenges will vary a little bit, like in terms of how to work that out. And so that's why it's important to be able to identify the difference between the two, because it will certainly change up how you approach each of the types of challenges that you may encounter. And so the leadership driver, again, the reason it's so critical is those barriers that get identified in that organization driver like at the facilitative administration or that systems intervention level, likely it's going to have to be leaders that help to solve those challenges and barriers that occur. And so again, that's why the leadership driver is so critical, because they can really help to support creating that hospitable environment to use evidence-based practices or programs. So let's talk about technical challenges. So technical challenges, the really simple way of thinking about this is they are, quote, tame. And so what that really means is they may be complicated, but they're relatively well defined. So they're a fairly easy problem to define. So for example, going back to one of the examples I used earlier about if you started implementing an evidence-based practice or a program, and there's, teachers are saying we really need to have that common planning time to support one another with lesson planning, that would be an example of a technical challenge. It may be complicated because scheduling can definitely be complicated, but it's a pretty well-defined problem. We know that, teachers are saying, hey, we need to have common planning time so we can support one another. So that would be considered technical. Another thing with technical, or an attribute of that, is attempted solutions can be tried and abandoned without any serious consequences. So going back to the scheduling issue that teachers had identified, with that, you could try a bunch of different options where, you provide class coverage for some teachers so that others can work together. You might be able to do that like once a week or something. And then, later on down the road, you find, well, that's not really working out too well. It's making it really difficult to be able to do that. So now let's abandon that particular solution and let's try something different. Let's try a new scheduling approach to see how we can get teachers to work together and to be able to provide coverage. So that's really, that's an attribute of technical challenge, is that you can try different things without it really causing any major ripples throughout the system. And then we know when a solution is reached. It's pretty obvious when we've reached that, that solution. So for example, again, with the scheduling, we know the solution to that would be we have teachers with common planning. And so we know at that point, once we've got a solid schedule in place where teachers are able to have that common planning, we know at that point we have reached our solution and we have accomplished that. So that is examples of technical challenges. Adaptive challenges are, quote, wicked problems. So these are a little bit more complex. And so the thing with adaptive challenges is sometimes they can be a little bit more ambiguous. We may not necessarily know exactly what's causing the issue or the challenge. And sometimes this can involve competing perspectives as well. So for example, you may be facilitating a team, we talked about earlier, having a team that may come together to develop instructional resources. Maybe the team's not working well together. They're really having a hard time accomplishing those particular deliverables. And so that could be more of an adaptive challenge in that we're not really sure why there's that challenge going on there. We don't know exactly the root cause of that. And so what makes adaptive challenges really difficult is that sometimes we can't pinpoint exactly what's causing the challenge or the issue. So which makes it even more difficult to resolve it and to think about how to approach some sort of solution for that. And then also with adaptive, and this is why it's actually called adaptive challenges, is because they may have to ebb and flow and be resolved as the context changes. So you may get the team working together really well. You might have tried something and maybe you thought you pinpointed, what was happening, but then later on we might have to resolve it again because maybe something else comes up with the team. So that's where, adaptive is a little bit more complex in terms of being able to solve it. And sometimes you may not necessarily be able to solve it in a final sense. It may be something that's always kind of occurring and you just have to work through it as you're going through the team. You may just have to continue to work through that and help to support them. So that's what adaptive challenges are, is they're more the wicked problems, something that's more complex to be able to solve, because it may be difficult to truly understand what the exact root cause of the challenge is. So I'm just going to share with you just briefly some ways to approach the technical and adaptive challenges, and then from there we'll go ahead and take a break before we get into the activity. So some strategies for approaching technical challenges. With technical, it's a little more straightforward in terms of what to do. One, define the problem. What is the problem? That's the first step of it. And so remember, technical challenges, the problem is fairly well defined to start with. So again, if we're talking back about the teacher scheduling, that's the problem. We need teachers to have a common planning time. So we've defined the problem. The next piece of that is to generate a solution. So you may, on this piece of it, you may just weigh the pros and cons. What are the different solutions that we could try? What seems like it's going to make the most sense? So this is kind of where you weigh your options at that point to see which one may be the best approach. From there, once you've figured out which solution you're going to try, you then are going to start to think about resources. What resources may you need to help support that? So if we're talking about scheduling and teachers having a common planning time, we may need to have a personnel to help cover classes so that teachers are able to plan once a week together. And so that may be part of the process, is you may have to talk with staff to see if they're willing to cover. So that may be included in that piece right there. And then lastly, you're really going to think about action planning, thinking through, okay, what are the tasks that we have to do? Who's going to do what, by when? And then you're going to monitor, how is that action planning going? Have we done the plan as intended? If not, why not? And think about, do we need to approach this a little bit differently? So that's really the approaches for the technical challenges aspect, is just thinking through, defining the problem, generating your solution, get your resources, and then action plan and monitor that action plan. And so the last piece before we get into break is strategies for adaptive challenges. So adaptive challenges are not quite as simple as, defining the problem, get your action plan going, and move forward. Adaptive challenges may require a little bit more problem solving. So Ron Heifetz from Harvard University has identified 6 strategies that can be used to help support adaptive challenges. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these today, but there's a link at the end of the presentation that you can use to go to the AI Hub and look at all 6 of these a little bit more in depth. So the couple that I want to focus on is, one, getting on the balcony. And so what getting on the balcony means is, if we've got this really complex problem going on, we're not exactly sure what's causing the problem or how to approach it. So getting on the balcony is really kind of how it sounds. It's taking a higher level up and just taking a look at what's happening down below. And it's really starting to figure out, looking for patterns, behaviors that may be occurring. So it's really just kind of taking that higher level up and just kind of looking at the problem below and thinking, what are some potential patterns that may be happening as a result. So that's going to help you to start to define the problem in your mind a little bit as you start to identify some of those patterns. So that's the getting on the balcony. The other one that I want to cover just briefly is giving the work world back. So giving the work world back is really having stakeholders involved in helping to identify the adaptive challenge. So having a group come together to say, hey, here are some things that we're seeing. What are your thoughts? So, working with others to let them help to support with identifying the challenge and also helping to resolve it. And the leader is really there just to help to facilitate, not to necessarily define the decisions out of that. They're just there to help to facilitate the conversation. So those are a couple that I wanted to just identify in terms of adaptive challenges. But again, you'll be able to read about all 6 of these on the resource at the end that I've provided. So with that being said, I think it's about time for a break. So I'm going to stop here. And then once you all have your break and you come back, I'm going to talk with you about the activity that you're going to take part in the breakout rooms.
Thank you, Amanda. And everybody, she is correct. It is time for us to have a break. And so it's 11:03. Why don't we come back at 11:08? That'll give you guys your full 5 minutes. And we will see you guys at that time, and we'll let Amanda pick back up.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully, everybody had an opportunity to get up, stretch, move, refill coffee or tea or Mountain Dew, whatever helps you get through a Saturday morning. Hopefully, you got to refill that. Um, and I guess Amanda, we'll let you kind of take back over. And just as a reminder, we are set for some group sharing time around 11:45. So just kind of as a timestamp.
All right, thanks, Shasta. All right, so now we're going to get into breakout rooms here where you're going to start to apply the implementation drivers. So real quick, as you all start to get into breakout rooms, just a couple of logistical things here is when you get into breakout rooms, if you could assign someone to be the note taker just to capture your thoughts as a team in terms of the activity, and you're actually going to have a sheet that you'll complete so that you'll be able to use that as your note sheet essentially. Assign somebody to be a timekeeper so that you can help keep the team moving on the activity, and then assign somebody else to be a reporter that will share out just the learnings that you encountered as a result of engaging in the activity. And then of course from there, once you all are able to determine who's going to fulfill each of those roles, then you'll start to work on the implementation drivers activity as a team, and then we'll come back together and take a few minutes to share out responses to the whole group. So before you get into breakout rooms, I do want to show you the activity just briefly so you can get a feel for what it looks like. So really on the implementation drivers activity, what's going to happen is when you get into teams, there are going to be different scenarios that you're going to encounter. And so you're going to think about that from a leadership perspective. How would you approach those particular scenarios? And so there's going to be some questions that you're going to work on together to help answer those. And it's really just going to lead you through each of the different drivers that we talked about today. So there's one specifically that's dedicated to the competency driver. You'll also have one that's focused on the organization driver, leadership. And then at the end, there's kind of a summary question, just thinking through about how implementation drivers can ultimately help to impact student outcomes for students with disabilities. Now, if there's something that you're not sure about, like if you're having a hard time remembering, what systems intervention means or facilitative administration means, because I know for me, those were two very new vocabulary phrases for me. So I had a hard time when I first started learning about drivers. So there's also a reference set of questions here that you can use, and you don't have to answer these questions. These are more just to help you think through what do each of those drivers mean. What are some of the things that you need to consider with each of those drivers? So if you get down to facilitative administration and systems intervention, and you're like, well, I don't remember what those mean. These questions here can help to trigger your thoughts in terms of what those particular terms are. So this is just really a resource to help you as you go through the activity. And then Shasta or Bill or Thomas or Becca, can one of you all put a link to the chat for them to be able to access these? Do any of you all have that handy?
Yes, we can do that. The resources are in SharePoint.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So yeah, I'll drop a link in the chat in a moment.
All right, thanks, Bill. All right, so are there any questions before we get started with the activity in breakout rooms?
Just as a quick, how much time are we going to have in breakout rooms? I know that kind of helps us think about our conversations as we move through them.
I would like us to have at least 5 minutes or so to come back and discuss. So is 11:45 okay?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
So come
Go
back
ahead.
at 11:45 is what you're
Yeah,
saying?
and then if that gives us 5 minutes to discuss, and then we wrap up at 11:50, is that correct?
That will work.
All right.
Great. So everyone knows how breakout rooms work. I'll open the rooms. It'll automatically be placed into them. And then at 11:45, I'll bring us back. And if at any time you're having technical difficulties, you have the ability to join the main room again, and I can offer assistance at that time. So at this time, I'll open the rooms and magic will happen.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, here is Krista. It looks like Krista, did you? Oh, no, it's already taken her right back out to her breakout room. Good, good. So I'm not sure where Thomas is. I don't think I assigned a room. Looks like Katie stepped back out and she's back in. Did anybody get a message from Thomas? Did I put him in a room? Okay, I did not put him in one, so I'm not sure where Thomas is, but maybe something came up with his connection.
Our idea of actually having the board to support our choice to have funding, especially when it comes to our 5-year plan.
All right, thank you for sharing. Yeah, the systems intervention piece, it could apply to, and it kind of depends on the structure too, depending on the school or district. But yeah, if you need to take it to the board, that would obviously have to require some systems intervention there to help get support with that. And with the facilitative administration, thinking through, weighing the pros and cons of things, trying to think through how could you solve it specifically at your level is the practice of facilitative administration. So I appreciate you sharing with that. Thank you. So real quick with that, so, Stacy already kind of talked about some approaches that they used or thought through with this. So for item 3, which one would you identify this as, a technical or adaptive challenge? Is there another group that's willing to share on what they identified it as for number 3?
Our group mainly identified it as adaptive, but we did talk about how some pieces of it could be a technical challenge.
Definitely. I would agree with that. I think it's probably more of a wicked problem in some respect because there's some other facets that's going on in terms of the buy-in process, maybe with coaching, but there also is some technical aspects of it too in terms of funding and things like that. So this one, that's why this scenario was chosen, because there's actually a couple of different things going on within it that could actually be technical and adaptive in this particular situation. And sometimes that happens in the real world in terms of challenges. You may have kind of both of them at the same time that's occurring. So that's awesome that you all were able to identify that within the problem or the challenge. All right, so the last one is how can focusing on the implementation drivers support improving educational outcomes for students with disabilities? So taking a step back and trying to process. I know that's a lot to take in. I totally get it. I was like that when I first engaged in the use of implementation science. So I wanted you all to have the opportunity to just sort of process all of this and just to think through, how can the drivers really push on results for students? So is there another group that's willing to share what they had talked about for item number 4?
Yeah, our group said overall we liked implementation drivers because it continually reviews and adapts programming. And it also helps hold everyone accountable, including the admin, the teachers, all staff accountable. So it's very well-rounded.
That's a great catch. I appreciate that. That is really the key piece typically in implementation science, we'll use that phrase, accountability rolls up, so that everybody, it's really about all hands on deck. Everybody is helping to support the implementation of the evidence-based practice and, looking at that data and that it's a team's approach. So I really appreciate that comment because that is exactly right. All right, I know we're getting close to the end, so I want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to take your survey. Thank you all so much for engaging in this activity and sharing your thoughts on that. I really appreciate it. So really quick, I just want to share just a couple of resources with you just briefly before you all wrap up today. So on the slide deck that you have in the SharePoint site, you'll see a section at the end that says resources. This right here is a link to the Active Implementation Hub. So this is where all the information that I talked about today comes from. I provided you with the main link, but on there you can poke around and look at all the different frameworks on there if you like. And if you want to specifically get to the implementation drivers section, the easiest way to probably navigate that is there's a search bar at the top. You can just put in implementation drivers, and then it should take you to the information on there about, technical adaptive challenges. That way, if you want to read more specifically on the technical or the adaptive challenges side and look at those strategies more, you can. So that's one resource. Then I also have a link to the State Systemic Improvement Plan webpage that's on the KDE website. There you'll find some resources for selecting usable innovations. You'll also see some math resources on there as well that were all developed in collaboration with stakeholders. And so those are some of the things that I wanted to share with you all. And so here's my contact information. Feel free, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to email me, and that's or call. And that's also in the slide deck as well that you have a copy of. And then just thank you all so much. I really appreciate your all's time today, and I really appreciate you all engaging in the activity. So thanks so much, and I hope everyone has a good day, and I'll turn it over to, I guess, Shasta to wrap us up.
Yes, thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you to all of our scholars for being here today, and of course, just hanging out until it's time for us to wrap up. I think Bill is going to add our evaluation. Please do not forget to do the evaluation. It is so meaningful for us. The feedback you guys provide, both just checking the check boxes, but also your comments. Like, we really do go through those and think about those, and it helps us make decisions for the team. And so he is going to share that or drop that for you guys. Is there anything else from the team? Thomas, Pete, Bill, Becca, anything else?
Yeah, so I'll just jump in and say again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you so much, Amanda. The presentation was absolutely amazing, and we have a lot of great praise in the chat, so you may want to look over there. And also, I do want to just kind of go over what I said initially, doing an update around the Kentucky Lead Summit. So it will be June the 4th. June the 3rd is when we plan to do a meet and greet. So you don't necessarily have to be there on the 3rd. It would be good to to be in the same space and to fellowship and community with one another. But the activities will actually start on June 4th in Louisville, Kentucky, from 8 until 4, and we'll send out the hotel information and everything that you would need for that day. But you all will not be out of anything. Travel reimbursements will be provided, and also hotel accommodations and food, of course, the day of the summit. So hopefully you all can attend, and I will turn it over to anyone else on the team that has any other or anything else they would like to announce. But thank you all.
Any last minute questions or anything from the team?
That's 8 to 4 Eastern time, correct?
That's correct, yes. Mm-hmm. And a registration link and more information around accommodations and the logistics for the day will be out in the next couple of weeks.
Perfect, thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Okay, well, if there isn't anything else, just a reminder, our next Saturday session is scheduled for April 30th, same time, same channel. And I'm also, right before we wrap up here, I'm just going to drop a link in the chat to the discussion board. I know if you're like me, like I have to schedule this time in my brain and the space on my calendar. And so I'll drop that just so you can easily have that. And if you wanted to take a few minutes today, you can. If you have questions fresh on your mind, it might be a good time to drop those. But if not, just try to remember to hop in there between now and our next meeting and just kind of see what your colleagues are saying and see what you can add, what resources or information you can add.
And Shasta, I just wanted to remind everyone that the link to the meeting, I'm going to try a recurring link so I don't have to keep sending updates. So this meeting link will be the same one that you use to join next month. As a reminder, also the reason that you get emails as a reminder to complete your survey data is that link never changes either, and UK cannot allow another month's data to be input until they clear out all of the data from last month. So that's why you'll get, please, reminder, please complete this data or complete this survey. And that is all I can think of for now. If anyone has any questions or needs anything, I'm available. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a great
everyone.
weekend. Thank you,
Have a
Amanda.
great weekend.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.